The Arizona desert did not offer easy mornings. At 5:13 hours, the loading dock at Fort Huachuca sat half in shadow and half in the orange blaze of a sun, not yet fully risen above the Huachuca Mountains. Dust moved across the tarmac in slow, purposeless spirals pushed by a wind without destination. The air carried motor oil and dry earth, and the faint metallic edge of ammunition that had been loaded and restacked through the night. Somewhere beyond the fence line, a hawk called once and went quiet. Sergeant Denise Holt stood at the tailgate of the third truck in the convoy line with a clipboard in her left hand and a flashlight in her right. She had been awake since 400. She had done her stretches in the dark barracks room before anyone else stirred. She had eaten half a granola bar and drank 2 cups of bad coffee from the mess facility, and she had not spent a single moment asking herself whether she was ready for the day. Readiness was not a feeling she traded in. Readiness was a checklist with a beginning and an end and a signature at the bottom, and she was moving through it the way she always moved through it, methodically, without rushing and without delay. 47 crates, that was what the manifest said. She counted 48. She ran the flashlight slowly down each row, touching the edge of each crate with her fingertips the way 4 years of logistics work had made automatic. The physical contact was not required by procedure. It was something she had developed on her third convoy, after she found a pallet with a fractured base that no visual inspection would have caught. The touch told her things the eyes sometimes missed. She reached the end of the manifest count, and there it was. Sitting at the back of the cargo bay in the last row against the forward bulkhead. No shipping label, no unit stencil, no serial number visible from any angle she tried. The lid was not sealed with the standard cam lock bolts used on every other crate in the truck. It was welded. Someone had run a clean bead of steel around the entire seam, and the weld was smooth enough that it had not been done in a hurry. The surface was already coated in the fine brown dust that settled on everything at Fort Huachuca within minutes of being left outside. Denise pressed her palm flat against the side panel. The metal was cold. She listened. Nothing shifted inside. She wrote the discrepancy on her clipboard. She noted the position in the cargo bay, the approximate weight based on the compression of the truck's rear suspension compared to the other loaded vehicles, and the absence of all identifying markings. Then she went to find Master Sergeant Burton Crane. She found him near the lead truck, reviewing route maps spread across the hood with Corporal Frank Settles standing across from him. Crane was 44 years old and carried the build of a man who had never fully separated himself from physical conditioning, even after 2 decades of Army service. His face was weathered and angular, the kind of face that communicated nothing unless he chose to communicate something. He had been Denise's senior NCO for 14 months. In those 14 months, she had never seen him rattled. She had never caught him in a moment of genuine uncertainty. She had always considered that a quality worth respecting in a senior leader. Standing in front of him now with her clipboard, the respect felt less certain than it usually did. She showed him the discrepancy. 48 crates where the manifest confirmed 47. 1 crate with no documentation, no identification, welded shut. Not standard issue configuration. Not tagged for any destination unit. She laid the facts out in order without editorializing, without speculation. Crane looked at the clipboard for exactly 2 seconds. He handed it back to her. Load it, drive it, deliver it. Denise did not move. Master Sergeant, convoy protocol requires every item in the load manifest to be documented and verified before departure. An unidentified crate with no chain of custody documentation is a security concern and potentially a safety. Sergeant Holt. His voice was the same calibrated temperature it always was, not cold, not warm, somewhere between the two in a place that admitted no argument. Load it, drive it, deliver it. We roll in 40 minutes. He turned back to the maps. Denise walked back to the truck. She climbed into the cargo bay and stood in front of the welded crate with her flashlight, and she looked at it for a long time. She ran the light along the base of the crate, where the welding was thickest. And then she saw it. Near the lower right corner, stamped into the metal in characters approximately half an inch tall, partially obscured by the weld material but readable if you were close enough and the light hit at the right angle. A sequence of letters and numbers. CID AZ 2021-447. The flashlight did not move. Her breathing did not change. But something in the center of her chest went very still, in the way that things go still when the world rearranges itself around a single fact. She knew that number. She had memorized it the same way a person memorizes the combination to the safe, where they keep everything that cannot be replaced. It was the case file number assigned by the Army Criminal Investigation Division to the inquiry into the death of Staff Sergeant Garrett Holt, her brother, killed 3 years ago in this same corridor, on a convoy that was supposed to be routine. The inquiry had been reviewed and formally closed within 60 days of his death. The conclusion was clean: accidental detonation of an improvised explosive device. No evidence of hostile targeting. No culpability assigned. Case closed. Box checked. She straightened up slowly. She wrote the number on her clipboard. Then she covered it with her thumb so no one passing by could read it from the ground. The sun was fully above the mountains now, and the loading dock had gone from orange to white, the kind of hard white that pressed against the eyes and erased shadows. Soldiers moved between vehicles in the purposeful rhythm of a convoy 40 minutes from rolling out. Denise climbed down from the cargo bay and continued her checklist. She checked load restraints. She checked the hydraulic lines on the tailgate. She went to all 4 corners and verified tire pressure and signed the form. She was thorough because she was always thorough. Because thoroughness was the discipline that had kept her and her cargo intact through 11 previous runs, when a less careful driver might have lost both. But one part of her mind was no longer on the checklist. It was on the number stamped near the base of the welded crate, and on a question she could not yet answer: how her dead brother's case file ended up sealed inside a crate with no manifest entry, loaded onto her truck, on a convoy she had been assigned to run. Corporal Frank Settles appeared at her elbow holding 2 cups of coffee. He was 28 years old and had the particular energy of a man who had made peace with the fundamental strangeness of military life and found it mostly entertaining. He had been running convoys through the Sonoran corridor for 2 years, and he had the radio operator's instinct for noticing when background noise shifted in ways that mattered. He handed her a cup without being asked. "You've got your counting face on," he said. "I found 48 crates." Settles looked at the back of the truck. A pause. What did Crane say? "Load it, drive it, deliver it." He drank his coffee. He looked at the truck. "What do you think is in it?" Denise put the clipboard under her arm. "I think we need to make sure everything else is properly secured before we roll." Settles understood when a conversation had reached its limit. He knew the difference between the questions that could be asked out loud and the ones that needed to travel a different route. He gave her a short nod and went back to his radio pack. At 5:58, in the pre-dawn period, while the staging area was still only half lit and most of the convoy crew were conducting their individual vehicle checks, Denise had been working through the communication equipment verification on her own truck when she noticed Crane moving along the vehicle line with a purpose that was distinct from routine inspection. He stopped at the 3rd truck, which was her truck, and opened the small access panel on the left rear quarter where the secondary communications relay was housed. He was there for approximately 90 seconds. Denise had assumed he was verifying the relay connections. She had noted it as routine senior NCO supervision and moved on with her checklist. Standing now at the tailgate with the case number still fresh in her mind, the 90 seconds near the communications relay panel played back in a slightly different light. She filed the memory in the place where she kept things she did not yet have enough context to evaluate. At 6:20, she was near the fuel depot at the east end of the staging area when she saw Crane stop walking. He was 40 meters away in the open tarmac, and he simply stopped in the way that people stop when they have seen something they were expecting to see. She almost missed it because she was watching Settles run a diagnostic on the convoy communications equipment. But the stillness caught her peripheral vision, the way trained attention catches things that do not fit the pattern. A man was standing near the chain-link fence at the edge of the staging area on the contractor access side. He wore civilian clothes and a laminated badge on a lanyard. He carried a leather document folder. He was in his late 40s, lean and composed with the kind of appearance that belonged to offices rather than military installations. He was looking directly at Crane with the focused calm of someone who has been waiting without impatience. Crane walked to him. They stood together for less than 2 minutes. Denise watched Crane reach into his breast pocket and remove something small, a USB drive, standard black casing the size of a thumb. He passed it to the man the way you pass something to someone when the motion is practiced, when you have done it before and the act requires no thought. The man took it without looking at it. He said something. Crane nodded once. The man walked to a dark sedan parked near the east gate and drove away before the convoy crew had finished its final checks. Denise noted the time on her clipboard, 6:22. She wrote 2 lines, contractor interaction, senior NCO, pre-departure, USB transfer. She did not write what she was thinking because she was not yet certain what she was thinking. She wrote what she had seen. That had always been the job. Count what is there. Record what you count. Let the numbers make the argument. At 6:45, Lieutenant Raymond Acaffer assembled the convoy team for the final briefing. He was 30 years old, compact in his movements, with the bearing of an officer who had built his authority through demonstrated competence rather than the weight of his rank alone. His voice carried across the staging area without effort. The mission was what it was: 4 trucks. Fort Huachuca to Forward Operating Base Sentinel, approximately 90 kilometers south through the Sonoran Corridor along the Arizona border. Priority cargo, estimated transit time of 3 hours. No deviation from the planned route without command authorization. Standard canyon passage protocols. Eyes up throughout. Denise listened. She looked at Crane during the briefing and found him watching Acaffer with his standard expression, which communicated very little. She looked at PFC Andy Weiss standing at the end of the row. He was 20 years old and this was his first convoy assignment. He had the lean alertness of someone who had trained extensively for a reality that had not yet arrived. His M4A1 was held correctly. Muzzle discipline was good. He had clearly paid attention in training. He had simply not been anywhere yet where the training was required. She looked back at the truck with the welded crate. Acaffer gave the order to mount up. The sun was already pulling the moisture out of the air and replacing it with heat. The convoy rolled at 7:01. The road south was a 2-lane blacktop running through low desert scrub before climbing into the canyon country of the corridor. This part of Arizona had a beauty that required patience to find. It did not come out to meet you. It offered itself in the way the morning light worked across the ridgelines and filled the lower cliff faces with colors that shifted from copper to violet to gray as the angles changed. Denise had made this run 6 times before. She knew where the shoulders dropped away. She knew the sections where the canyon walls came close enough to throw the engine sound back in compressed waves. She knew the pass. She drove and she watched. Settles cycled through radio frequencies with the half-conscious fluency of a man doing something habitual. The convoy communications channel was steady and clean. He also monitored the secondary emergency frequency out of practice, the way he always did, the background noise a constant texture beneath the engine and the wind. Sergeant Holt. Weiss's voice came from the rear seat after about 20 minutes on the road. He had drawn the back position in the third vehicle. How long have you been running this route? 4 years in the corridor. Is it usually quiet? Usually. He was quiet for a moment. The road curved left, and a canyon wall rose on their right, pale rock streaked with dark mineral lines running vertically from top to bottom. I looked up the unit before I got assigned, Weiss said carefully. I saw the name Holt. I looked it up. I found a mention of a Staff Sergeant Garrett Holt, KIA, in this corridor a few years back. I did not know he was your brother until I read further. I apologize if... IED, Denise said. That is what the official report says. A silence, then quietly, I am sorry, Sergeant. Thank you. She drove. The wind off the canyon walls was a sound she had heard enough times to stop consciously registering. But now it carried something back to her. Not the memory itself, but the edge of it. The texture of a specific morning 3 years ago when a letter arrived at her mother's house in Prescott, 6 days after the funeral, delayed in the mail system the way things sometimes are, which meant she had already stood at Garrett's grave when she finally read what he had written. His handwriting had always been slightly too large for the lines. Their mother had said it was the way Garrett wrote when he was working something out as he went. The letter from 3 years ago had been written in that way, words filling the margins, sentences that started and doubled back, and one line near the bottom of the second page that had gone forward with complete conviction. I found something in the crates, Denny, something that should not be there. I am going to submit the report in 4 days. I want you to know this in case anything happens before I can. She had read that sentence so many times that she could no longer hear it in his voice. It had become simply a row of words with a meaning. She had spent 3 years trying to attach to a larger truth without enough pieces to complete the picture. This morning, a set of stamped characters on a welded crate had given her one more piece. She glanced in the side mirror at the truck behind her. The fourth truck, Crane's vehicle. It was holding formation at the correct interval. Everything appeared exactly as it should appear. She looked back at the road. The canyon deepened. The walls rose higher and the strip of sky above the convoy narrowed. Akefer's voice came across the channel at regular intervals, calm and measured, the standard calls of a convoy commander maintaining situational awareness. Nothing in his voice to alarm. Settles reached forward and turned a dial on the secondary receiver. He stopped. He turned it back half a click and held it and tilted his head the way he did when he was listening through static for something specific. Holt. I hear it. It was a data transmission signal, not voice traffic, automated, cycling on a regular interval of approximately 90 seconds. The kind of signal a compact GPS transmitter produces when it is actively broadcasting positional data to a remote receiver. The frequency was just below the standard civilian emergency band, positioned close enough to blend into the background traffic of the spectrum without immediately standing out. Settles pulled the frequency scanner from his kit and ran a cross-reference. 90 seconds of work. He set it down. It is broadcasting our position. Denise kept her eyes on the road. How precise? 10 meters, possibly tighter. Since when? He checked the signal cycling pattern against their elapsed route time. His jaw set in the way it did when he landed on an answer he did not want. Since we left the wire. She thought about Crane at the communications relay panel. 90 seconds. A small device, battery-powered, could be seated in that panel cavity in 90 seconds by someone who knew what he was doing. She thought about the USB drive passing at 6:22 and what kind of data a USB drive might carry if one of those data types was a GPS activation code and a receiver frequency. Settles keyed the convoy channel and reported the signal. Its frequency, its cycling interval, its apparent origin somewhere within the convoy formation, its content. He gave the information in the clean, flat language of a soldier reporting facts to a commanding officer. He gave Akafar everything he would need to make a decision. Akafar responded in 4 seconds. He said he had copied the report. He said he was pushing the information up to his command channel immediately for guidance. A silence followed, much longer than a command response should take. Denise counted 20 seconds, then 30, then 40. Then Akafar came back on, and his voice had something in it that had not been there before. Not fear, something quieter than fear and harder to name. Command channel is locked per operational parameters. No response is authorized at this time. A pause of 2 full seconds. Maintain current speed and formation. Do not deviate from route. Denise waited for a follow-on instruction, for a redirect, for anything that matched what a convoy commander does when he cannot reach his command channel and his formation is being actively tracked. Akafar said nothing more. She kept her eyes on the road ahead, and she thought about what it means when the command channel is locked at the precise moment it is most needed. She thought about 2 possible explanations. The first was a technical malfunction at the worst possible time. The second was that the lockout was not a malfunction at all, that it was a condition someone had arranged. That somewhere above Akafar's level, someone had decided this convoy would maintain its route regardless of what the sensors reported. She filed both explanations and drove. The canyon walls came fully together ahead of them now. The road bent to the left before opening again on the far side. She had been through this pass 6 times. She knew the geometry of it. She knew that the ridgeline above the left wall had a flat shelf running approximately 150 meters, oriented to provide direct sightlines to every vehicle on the road below. She had noted it on her first transit as a potential problem. She had noted it on every transit since. She looked in the side mirror. Crane's truck had dropped back. Not dramatically, not enough to trigger the automated spacing alarm, but enough that she noticed it because she noticed everything that was measurable. The standard convoy interval was 150 meters. The gap behind her truck had been holding correctly until approximately 10 minutes ago. Now it was longer. Crane's truck was drifting. The kind of drift that reads as road conditions rather than intention if you do not know what you are looking for. She watched the mirror for another 30 seconds. The gap did not close, it grew. She thought about the communications relay panel at 5:58. She thought about the USB drive at 6:22. She thought about a command channel that locked at the precise moment. A report of active tracking came up through the chain. "Settles," she said. "Yeah. Check your kit." He did not ask why. He reached down and cycled the action on his M4A1 with the practiced economy of a man who had run enough miles of bad road to understand that the question why is secondary to the fact of being ready. He checked his vest. He verified his magazines. In the rear seat, Weiss watched them and understood in the wordless way that certain young soldiers understand things before they can name them, that the register of the morning had shifted. He checked his own kit without being told. His hands moved correctly. He was scared. She could hear it in his breathing, but he did not let the fear take his hands off his equipment. The canyon walls caught the sun now and turned the light hard and flat. The shadows at the base of the cliffs deep into a darkness that sunlight at this angle could not reach. She adjusted her grip on the wheel. She breathed in slowly. She looked in the side mirror one more time. Crane's truck had not entered the pass. It was sitting on the open road behind them, outside the canyon entrance, stationary on the shoulder, engine running. She could see the exhaust shimmer in the heat. He was not falling behind. He had stopped. She thought it clearly, the way she thought about numbers when they refused to reconcile. He is not falling behind. He is stepping back. He is putting distance between himself and whatever comes next. He knows what comes next. He has known since before 7:01. He knew when he was standing at the fence with the contractor. He knew when he spent 90 seconds at the communications relay panel in the pre-dawn dark. He knew when he told her to load it and drive it and deliver it without another word. She was forming the next thought when the mirror filled with light. The detonation was ahead of her. The lead truck. It arrived as both sound and force at the same instant, a percussion so large and so sudden that it did not register as a single event, but as a reorganization of everything around it. The canyon walls caught the blast wave and threw it back compressed, and the windshield flexed under the pressure in a way that windshields are not supposed to flex. The lead truck came off the road in a single violent moment, its front end destroyed, its chassis rotating sideways in a rolling arc of smoke and shrapnel and burning rubber. Denise had the vehicle stopped before the echoes of the first explosion had fully died. The second explosion arrived 6 seconds later, further up the canyon. The strip of blue sky above the pass filled with black smoke. And 400 meters behind the convoy, at the canyon entrance, Crane's truck sat on the shoulder with its engine running and did not move forward. The desert, which had been quiet for the last 3 hours and 11 previous convoys, and the entire 4-year career of a woman who counted crates for a living, was quiet no more. She had driven 48 crates into a canyon that someone had been waiting for. She had driven her brother's last words into the middle of everything. Someone was willing to kill to prevent from reaching the light. And now she had to decide, in the next 30 seconds, exactly what kind of soldier she actually was. The first thing her hands did was set the parking brake. Her mind had not caught up yet. Her body moved on the accumulated memory of 11 previous convoys and 4 years of procedure, and her hands set the parking brake and cut the ignition before she had fully processed what had just happened 40 meters ahead of her in the canyon pass. The engine ticked as it cooled. The heat from the explosion had reached the windshield and left a trembling haze on the glass even at that distance. The smoke from the lead truck was already dense enough to cut visibility to almost nothing in the canyon's narrow throat, and the smoke was not finished rising. She was out of the cab in 3 seconds. The sound was everywhere. Not just the explosion which had ended, but the aftermath of it, the secondary crackle of burning fuel and the compressed percussion of canyon walls throwing echoes back and forth between themselves, until the noise became a physical environment rather than a collection of individual sounds. She moved in a low sprint to the front of her truck and put the engine block between herself and the direction of the blast. Cover first. Assess second. The training said it in that order, and the order was correct. She assessed. The lead truck was on its side. The front axle had been destroyed, and the vehicle had rotated almost 90 degrees before the left canyon wall stopped it. The cab was on fire. The cargo bed had separated at the rear mounting and lay at a steep angle against the rock face, smoking but not yet burning. One soldier from the lead vehicle was on the ground, not moving. A second was pulling himself toward the canyon wall with both forearms, his left leg dragging at an angle that had no good meaning. The second truck in line had stopped 10 meters behind the lead truck, not on fire. The driver's door was open and a soldier was prone behind the front tire, his rifle up and his head below the hood line. From the ridgeline above the left canyon wall, muzzle flash. Precise and spaced and nothing like the undisciplined fire of someone startled into action. Controlled bursts. 2 rounds, pause, 2 rounds. Aimed at specific targets by a shooter who had settled into a prepared position before the convoy arrived. She counted 3 distinct firing positions across the upper left ridgeline in 5 seconds. 3 weapons. 3 different angles. Each position elevated above the road floor by at minimum 40 meters, each with clean sightlines to every vehicle in the formation. This had been prepared. The canyon floor had been selected for this specific purpose before they ever left Fort Huachuca. The GPS signal cycling every 90 seconds since before they rolled out had told those people exactly when to expect them. Corporal Frank Settles hit the ground on the passenger side of the truck and moved around the front to join her. He had his M4A1 up and his radio pack secured. His jaw was set, and his eyes were moving across the ridgeline in the systematic way they moved across a radio spectrum when he was searching for a specific signal. 3 positions left ridge, Denise said, possibly 4, something higher on the right side. I see them, they are not using standard issue weapons. He listened to the report pattern for 3 more seconds. The left ridge is firing an M110, semi-automatic, consistent spacing, trained marksman, not opportunistic. She absorbed that. The M110 semi-automatic sniper system was not available on any black market supply run. Whoever these people were, they had been equipped by someone with access to things that required serious money and no conscience. "Where is Acaffer?" she said. Settles pointed left. Lieutenant Raymond Acaffer was down on one knee behind the second truck, his left hand pressed flat against his right shoulder, his rifle still in his right hand. He was mobile but moving with the deliberateness of someone who has taken damage to a part of the body they need. Shrapnel from the first explosion. He was functional, but he was not in command of the situation in any meaningful way yet. Denise looked at her own truck. The ring-mounted M250 caliber machine gun was on the roof, intact, undamaged in the initial exchange. Every other vehicle in the formation had a single M4A1 per occupant and nothing heavier. The M2 was the only crew-served weapon left in the canyon that had the range and penetration to reach those ridge positions with real authority. An M4A1 at this distance, firing up at prepared positions on high ground, was a suppression tool at best. The M2 changed the conversation entirely. She told Settles to cover the right ridgeline. She told him to keep Weiss behind the engine block. Then she turned and climbed. The ring mount was designed for use while the vehicle was in motion, with a driver and a spotter and a second person managing the feed. It was not designed with the expectation that the operator would climb to it alone under fire with no spotter and no one managing the truck. Denise went up the side of the vehicle using the step rail and the cargo frame and the grab handle above the rear cab window, and she was at the ring mount in 4 seconds, and an incoming round hit the truck body 18 inches below where her right knee had been 3 seconds earlier. She did not look at where the round had struck. She got on the gun. The M2 had been maintained correctly. She had personally verified the headspace and timing that morning during her pre-departure checklist. She had cleaned the feed tray and inspected the barrel and noted no deficiencies. It was the same weapon it had always been. What was different was that the muzzle flash she was looking for now was not painted on a plywood target at a range in Fort Huachuca. What was different was that the rounds coming back at her were not blanks. She found the first position. She identified the gap in the boulder formation on the left ridgeline, where the muzzle flash had appeared in the same location twice in succession. She pressed the butterfly trigger, and held it for a controlled 2-second burst and walked the rounds across the position and watched the muzzle flash stop producing. She moved to the second position, then the third. She worked across the left ridgeline the way she worked across a manifest, position by position. Nothing skipped and nothing doubled back on until it had been addressed. The recoil was substantial and the barrel heat was immediate, and the sound inside the canyon was enormous. The 50 caliber percussion bouncing off the rock walls and building on itself, until the entire pass seemed to be producing a single continuous roar. She did not feel the noise as noise. She felt the recoil and the heat and the vibration of the mounting ring, and she counted muzzle flashes and she addressed them. In 80 seconds, she had suppressed 3 of the 4 identified positions on the left ridge. She released the trigger and turned to assess the right side. Below the right canyon wall, one of the attackers from a forward position had moved down to the canyon floor during her suppression run, using her fire as cover to advance toward the vehicle line. He was prone behind a boulder cluster at the base of the right wall, approximately 60 meters from her truck, his weapon trained on the second vehicle. He had not seen her turn the M2 toward his side of the canyon. She put a 2-second burst into the boulder cluster. He did not return fire after that. She dropped from the ring mount. Not a retreat, a decision. She had suppressed 3 positions and eliminated a 4th from the elevated gun, but the M110 on the right ridge, the primary sniper position that Settles had identified, was still active. The shooter up there was disciplined. He had held his fire through her entire M2 run, waiting for her to exhaust the suppression logic before resuming. She could see his position from the ground now in a way the ring mount angle had not allowed. He was at approximately 570 meters, near the flat section of the right ridgeline she had memorized from 6 previous transits. She could not reach him effectively with the M2 at that angle without repositioning the vehicle. She could not reach him with her M4A1 at that distance. But the man she had just suppressed at the boulder cluster was no longer a problem, and the weapon he had carried was. She moved fast along the base of the right canyon wall, staying low, using the shadow that the morning sun had not yet filled. She reached the boulder cluster in 40 seconds. The attacker was down. His weapon was a meter from his right hand. She picked it up. M110 semi-automatic sniper system, 10-round magazine, partially expended, Leupold Mark IV scope, 10 power magnification. She checked the round in the chamber. She checked the magazine. She moved back along the wall to a position that gave her a clear sightline up the right ridgeline, and she pressed her back against the rock and let her breathing settle for 3 full seconds. The scope brought the ridgeline close enough to read. 580 meters. The sniper had chosen a position between 2 large boulders with a narrow firing lane that was almost invisible from the road below. Almost. The barrel of his weapon extended 2 inches beyond the left edge of the nearer boulder, and in the sharp Arizona morning light that 2-inch extension produced a thin shadow that the rock behind it did not produce. She adjusted her position by 4 inches to clear the canyon wall to her left. She placed the crosshairs on the shadow and on what the shadow attached to. She held 1 complete breath. She released half of it. She pressed the trigger. The recoil was lighter than the M2 and more precise. She stayed on the scope. The barrel shadow moved. Then it did not move again. The right ridgeline went quiet. She held the M110 in her right hand and moved back toward the convoy line, and somewhere behind her, she heard Settles shout something that might have been a question or might have been a confirmation. But she was already moving toward what she had seen from the ring mount and could not stop thinking about. Weiss. He had moved out of his position behind the engine block. He had done it with reasonable tactical instinct, staying low, working toward the right canyon wall to create a crossfire angle on the positions that were now suppressed. The instinct was sound, but the angle he had chosen had briefly exposed his left shoulder to a firing line from the fourth position, the one that was active before she took the M110 from the boulder cluster. He was on the road, not moving after landing, not moving. She was running before the thought had fully formed. The road surface was packed dirt and gravel, and her boots found it, and she ran low and fast with the M110 still in her right hand, and 2 rounds hit the canyon wall to her left while she crossed the open stretch between the trucks, and she did not change direction, and she did not slow down. She reached Weiss. He was breathing. His eyes were open and wide, and his face had gone the flat white color that faces go when the body is in serious shock. But he was breathing, and his right hand was still gripping the pistol grip of his M4A1. That grip told her the things she needed to know. She grabbed the carrying handle of his kit and pulled him behind the front tire of the second truck and pressed her back against the wheel well and held him there. "Stay with me," she said, not a suggestion, a command. His mouth moved once before the word came out. "Yes." She pulled a field dressing from her own kit and applied direct pressure to the entry wound. Upper left shoulder, bleeding but not arterially. The clavicle was likely broken and he would need surgery inside 12 hours, but he would last longer than 12 hours. She applied the dressing and secured it and told him to keep his right hand on it. From this position, crouched behind the second truck, she had a sightline down the full length of the canyon road toward the entrance of the pass. She could see Crane's truck parked on the road shoulder outside the canyon mouth, 400 meters away, engine still running. She could see Crane. He was not in the truck. He was standing in the open road surface at the canyon entrance, in a position that was out of the direct line of fire from the ridge positions above the pass walls. He held his radio handset to his ear. He was not moving toward the canyon. He was not firing his weapon. He was standing in the open desert with his handset to his ear, and he was not doing anything that a soldier does in an active engagement. Then Settles appeared at her side from the smoke to the left. He had blood on his left forearm from a fragment that had caught him in the initial exchange, and he had wrapped it himself without stopping. He looked at Weiss, assessed in 2 seconds, and looked at Denise. 2 positions remained suppressed on the left ridge. You eliminated one on the right plus the primary sniper. Akaffer is mobile and is directing the 2 functional soldiers from the lead vehicle. "Crane," she said. Settles did not express surprise. He has been on secondary frequency since the first contact. My scanner caught the handset signal 3 times. He is not communicating with our QRF network. He paused. He is communicating with someone inside the canyon, and I can tell you one more thing. He looked toward the canyon entrance where Crane was standing. During your M2 run, a burst from the right ridge swept the road at the canyon mouth, 40 rounds. It passed within 15 meters of Crane. From that elevation with that weapon, missing a standing man at 30 feet is a choice, not a miss. She absorbed this. She filed it with the GPS signal and the communications relay panel and the USB drive at 622, and all the other pieces that had been assembling themselves into a picture she had not wanted to see clearly, until seeing it clearly became the only option left. "I am going to the 4th truck," she said. She moved along the base of the right canyon wall, staying in the shadow, working toward the rear of the formation. She passed the 3rd truck. She moved to where the narrow section of the canyon mouth began. The 4th truck sat half inside the shadow of the pass and half in the white open light of the desert beyond, its engine still running. Crane was at the rear of the 4th truck. His back was to the canyon and to her approach. He had a utility knife with a 4-inch fixed blade in his right hand, and he was working the point of it into the gap, where the RPG fragmentation had cracked the weld along the base of the sealed crate during the initial exchange. The crack was approximately 18 inches long, not wide enough to open the crate, wide enough for a determined man with a knife and enough time. She stopped 6 feet behind him. She raised her M4A1. "Step away from the crate, Master Sergeant." He stopped moving. His shoulders shifted slightly, the kind of shift that happens when a person takes a single controlled breath before turning to face something they have been expecting. He turned. His face was what it had always been, calibrated, the flat, weathered expression that gave nothing away unless giving something away served a purpose. But the calibration was not entirely holding. There was something behind it now, something that 14 months of working alongside him had given her enough reference to recognize. It was not guilt, exactly. It was the expression of a man who has been carrying a particular weight for a very long time, and who understands, standing in this specific moment, that the carrying is over. He looked at the rifle, then at her face, then he lowered the knife to his side. "You need to stand down, Sergeant Holt." The calibrated voice was still operational, still producing its standard temperature. "This is a classified security matter at a level above your clearance. Return to your defensive position." "Put the knife on the truck bed." He set it down. "Now your rifle." "Sergeant, I am giving you a direct order to." "Your rifle, Master Sergeant." He looked at her face for 3 seconds. Then he unslung his M4A1 with slow, deliberate movements and placed it on the truck bed beside the knife. He raised both hands to shoulder height. The gesture was practiced. The gesture of a man who has run the available mathematics and arrived at the same answer she had. "Give me the files," he said. The calibrated voice had shifted by a degree, moved from authority towards something that occupied the space where a request lives. "Give me the files and walk away from this vehicle. This is larger than you understand, larger than this unit and this mission and anything happening in this corridor today." "Step back from the crate." He took 2 steps back. She moved forward to the cargo bay and reached into the cracked seam of the crate. Her fingers found paper immediately. Not a single loose sheet but a bound stack, organized and rubber-banded, the rubber band partially frayed from the heat of the welding work. She pulled the stack through the gap with both hands and stood at the tailgate of the 4th truck and looked at the cover page. A header, a case file number in standard CID format, a date from 3 years ago. The case file number was CID AZ 2021-447. The name on the investigation line read Holt, Garrett J. SSG. And in pencil, in the margin of the cover page, in the handwriting she would have recognized through smoke and low light, and any condition that human vision can operate under, the handwriting that was always slightly too large for the space because that was how Garrett wrote when he was working something out as he went. The margin note read, "3rd shipment confirmed. Lot numbers match forward to recipient units. Bringing this to submission 700 Thursday." Thursday had been 4 days after he wrote that sentence in the margin. He had not made it to Thursday morning. She stood at the rear of the 4th truck with her brother's words in her left hand and her rifle still trained on crane with her right, and she let the full weight of it arrive. Not all of it. The complete shape would take more than this moment. But enough of it arrived to feel. The thread running from the case number on the crate to the USB drive at the fence at 6:22 to the GPS signal broadcasting their position, since before they left the wire to the command channel that locked at the precise moment, a report came through the chain. The thread ran through all of it, and through the 44th year of Burton Crane's military service, and through a Wednesday night 3 years ago when her brother had been 48 hours, from submitting something that a number of people with a great deal to lose had decided could not be submitted. She looked at Crane over the barrel. He read her face. Then he did the one thing she had not anticipated. He lowered his hands from shoulder height to his sides. He did not reach for his weapons on the truck bed. He lowered his hands, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who has been holding a particular weight across a very long time and has decided that the carrying ends here. "Your brother had been building that file for 6 months," he said. "He documented 3 separate shipment diversions with matching lot numbers. He had the documentation to trace the physical path of the material from point of origin through the diversion channels to the end recipients. He was going to submit the full package Thursday morning at 700. He stopped. He looked at the files in her hand. "I received notification of his intent on Wednesday night. I passed his convoy position and departure time to the network contact. I was told the convoy would be stopped and the documentation retrieved, that no personnel would be harmed. That was the arrangement." The canyon behind them was still producing the sounds of an engagement in its final stages. Settles and the remaining functional soldiers were in the last exchange with the surviving ridge position. The sounds were closer together now, which meant the distances were closing, which meant it was nearly over. "They lied to you," she said. "Yes," he said, "they lied to me." She held the rifle on him, and she did not speak for the length of time it took her to be certain of what she was going to say next. "You knew afterward," she said. "When the report came back as accidental IED, you knew it was not accidental." He did not look away from her. "Yes." "And you said nothing." "No," he said, "I said nothing." The rotary sound reached the canyon then. The distinct pulse of helicopter rotors, which has its own acoustic signature when it enters canyon terrain, and which carries differently from small arms fire or explosion. She had heard it enough times to know what it was before the sound had fully formed. QRF, 45 seconds out, perhaps 60. Crane heard it. His eyes moved to the narrow strip of sky above the canyon mouth, then back to the files in her left hand. From behind her, from somewhere in the shadow along the left canyon wall, the last attacker moved. She registered it at the far edge of her peripheral vision. Not a soldier withdrawing under suppression. A single figure moving low and fast along the base of the left canyon wall, coming from inside the pass, moving toward the 4th truck with an object held in both hands. The object was rectangular and brick-shaped. She recognized the shape before she had processed why she recognized it. A shaped charge. The attacker was 15 meters away, moving with intent. He had not broken when the rest of the team withdrew under her suppression fire. He had held his position in the pass and waited for the engagement to move away from the 4th truck. He was the contingency. If extraction failed, destruction. A shaped charge of that size placed against the cracked seam of the crate would reduce the contents to fragments and carbon. 12 meters now. Crane had seen him. Crane was looking at her, watching her process the geometry. She had the rifle on Crane. She had the files in her left hand. She had 12 meters of road between the attacker and crate 48. She could hold the rifle on Crane. She could keep the man who had just told her, in plain language, that he had handed her brother's convoy position to the people who killed him from running, from destroying what remained of the files, from getting to the QRF first with a prepared account that would carry the weight of 23 years of service against the account of a 26-year-old logistics sergeant. Or she could turn and stop the man with the charge before he reached the crate. She could not do both. Crane saw the calculation moving across her face. Something shifted in his expression that she still did not have a precise word for. It was not satisfaction. It was not relief. It was something older and more worn than both of those. the expression of a man watching someone else arrive at the same intersection he had arrived at years ago, the intersection where the geometry forces a choice, and the choice reveals everything that the person is actually made of. She pressed the files against her chest with her left forearm and turned and ran at the attacker. He was 9 meters away when she turned. He had been focused on the crate and had not adjusted for her movement. The fraction of a second it took him to register and recalculate was the fraction she needed. She crossed the distance in 3 strides and hit him at the left shoulder with her full weight and drove them both sideways into the left canyon wall, and the shaped charge skidded across the road surface toward the opposite wall, and she got one knee on his chest, and she had the barrel of her M4A1 pressed against his sternum before he had stopped moving. He stopped moving. She held the position. Her breathing was controlled and her hands were steady, and the files were still pressed against her chest with her left forearm and had not fallen. She looked back at Crane. He had not run. He had not reached for his weapons on the truck bed. He was standing exactly where she had left him, hands at his sides, watching her with the expression she could not name. He had had 10 seconds to recover his rifle. He had used those 10 seconds to stand still and watch. "Don't move," she said to the attacker beneath her. She looked at Crane. "Don't move," she said to him as well. The helicopter sound was close now. She could feel the rotor pulse through the canyon air as a physical thing. She could hear the engine note differentiating as the aircraft lost altitude toward the canyon mouth. She held the files against her chest, and she held the barrel on the attacker, and she waited for the sound of the rotors to become the sound of engines over the canyon mouth, and she breathed in the acrid smoke of the burning lead truck and the dry desert air, and she thought about Garrett writing in pencil in a margin, working something out as he went, in handwriting that was always slightly too large for the space. He had found these files first. He had documented what he found over 6 months. He had trusted that the information, properly submitted through the correct channels, would do what the information was supposed to do. He had been 48 hours from finding out whether he was right. She pressed her left forearm tighter against the files and waited for the ramp to drop. The first helicopter cleared the canyon mouth, and the rotor wash hit the desert floor, and the dust came up in a wide, flat circle, and the light was very bright and very hard in the way that Arizona light is always hard, and Sergeant Denise Holt waited and did not put down the files. Not for Crane. Not for anyone above Crane. Not for any arrangement that had been made between any set of people who had decided that her brother's documentation was a problem to be solved rather than a truth to be reckoned with. She waited for the ramp to drop. The rotor wash arrived before the helicopter was visible. It came down the canyon mouth as a wall of displaced desert air that hit Denise in the chest and lifted the fine dust from the road's surface in a wide, swirling curtain that turned the morning light brown for 4 seconds before the aircraft itself appeared over the rock lip above the pass entrance. She kept her knee on the attacker's chest and her left forearm pressed flat against the files inside her body armor, and she did not turn to look at the sky. She had heard the sound, and she knew what it was. It meant the next 60 seconds would be organized chaos. It meant people would move fast and speak loudly, and in the noise of organized chaos, things could be lost or changed or handed to the wrong person before anyone had established the correct and complete account of what had happened in this canyon. She was not going to let that happen. The helicopter set down on the open road surface outside the canyon mouth, 30 meters from where she was kneeling. The ramp dropped before the rotors had fully spooled down. Medics came off first, moving in pairs toward the canyon interior where Settles was already signaling. Security elements fanned to the flanks in practiced arcs. A staff sergeant from the QRF element reached her position at a run, weapon at low ready, eyes moving between the man on the ground and Denise. "Status," he said. "One attacker secured, no weapon within reach. Files from an unmanifested cargo crate secured on my person. Master Sergeant Burton Crane, standing at the 4th truck in formation, requires immediate custody. He is unarmed. He will not resist." She delivered all of it in a single organized breath without hesitation. "2 wounded further into the pass. PFC Weiss, upper left shoulder, single entry wound, field dressing applied. Lieutenant Acaffer, shrapnel right shoulder, mobile and oriented. Lead vehicle destroyed. 1 confirmed KIA, possible second and third trucks operational." The QRF sergeant looked at her for precisely 1 second with the expression of someone receiving a more organized situation report than they expected from a soldier who had been in an active firefight for the past 30 minutes. "Copy all," he said, then he moved. A second figure came off the helicopter ramp behind the QRF element, not military in bearing, which was the first thing Denise registered, not moving the way soldiers move off a ramp, which is fast and low and directed by training. This person moved with deliberate speed, purposeful rather than tactical, the speed of someone who knows exactly where they are going and has a specific reason to arrive before anyone else. The figure was a woman in her mid-40s, wearing Army combat uniform without rank insignia visible at this distance, carrying a hard-sided document case in her right hand. She walked directly toward the 4th truck, toward the cracked crate. Denise was off the attacker and on her feet, and between the woman and the crate in 4 seconds. "Stop," she said. The woman stopped. She looked at Denise's M4A1, which was not raised but was not at rest either. She looked at Denise's face. And then she reached into her left breast pocket and produced a credential wallet and held it open with the practiced motion of someone who has presented identification under difficult conditions before and understood that the correct response is calm and immediate. The badge read, United States Army Criminal Investigation Division. The name below the badge photograph read Dahl, Patricia A. Chief Warrant Officer 3. "My name is Patricia Dahl," she said. "I have been the lead CID investigator on case file CID AZ 2021-447 for 14 months. She paused. "Sergeant Holt, your brother contacted my office 3 years and 2 months ago before he died. He sent a preliminary documentation package and a personal letter describing his concerns and his intent to submit a full formal report. He asked that if anything happened to him before submission, someone in CID should know where to look." She looked at the files pressed against Denise's chest. "He trusted that the chain would hold if he started it. He started it. I have been trying to close it ever since." Denise looked at the badge. She looked at Dahl's face. She lowered the M4A1 to her side. She did not give Dahl the files. Not yet. Not until she understood the shape of what she was standing inside of. "He was killed 4 days after he contacted you," Denise said. "Yes. And you have been building this case for 14 months. The preliminary work started earlier, but the active investigation with formal authorization began 14 months ago when we had sufficient predicate to proceed." "This convoy was not routine," Denise said. Dahl was quiet for 2 seconds. The desert around them was still producing sound, the medics working in the canyon interior, the QRF soldiers processing crane near the 4th truck, the rotors of the helicopter cycling down to a slow idle. All of it at a distance that made this conversation feel like it was happening in a separate and specific silence. "No," Dahl said, "it was not routine. You chose this convoy specifically. We chose the route, the cargo, the timing, The configuration we assessed would draw the network into a retrieval attempt rather than a destruction attempt. You knew who I was when you chose it. Dahl held her gaze. Yes. Denise stood in the desert heat outside the canyon mouth, and she let the full weight of that single syllable settle where it needed to settle. Yes. You knew whose sister I was. You knew that a logistics sergeant named Denise Holt had been driving supply convoys through the Sonoran corridor for 4 years, and that her brother had been killed in this same corridor, and that his case file was stamped on the crate you loaded onto her truck. You knew all of that, and you sent her into this canyon anyway. She understood the operational logic. She understood that Garrett had started a chain, and that someone had to be in a position to complete it, someone with enough personal investment to hold the files under fire, someone the network would not anticipate as a threat because the network saw logistics specialists the same way everyone else saw them, as drivers, as ammo carriers, as the people in the background who made everything work without ever being part of it. Understanding it did not make it easier to stand inside of. Private First Class Weiss is 20 years old, she said. He is being treated for a gunshot wound to the shoulder sustained on his first convoy assignment. Lieutenant Acaffer took shrapnel. Neither of them knew what they were part of. I know, Dahl said. Acaffer heard the GPS broadcast report and maintained the route. I spent 20 minutes in this canyon believing he might be part of the network. He was not. No, Dahl said. He was not. She paused here in the way that people pause when they are about to say something that will be uncomfortable regardless of how carefully it is framed. At 6:20, Acaffer received a command override transmitted from 2 levels above his direct command authority. The instruction was to maintain the convoy route regardless of field conditions, and to hold the command channel to inbound traffic only. He was told it was a communication security evaluation. He was not told what it actually was. He did what a disciplined officer does when he receives a valid order from a valid authority with no apparent reason to disbelieve it. She looked at Denise steadily. He tried to reach command when the broadcast signal came through. You heard him. The channel was locked because the locking was part of the operation design, not a malfunction. He followed his last valid briefing order because it was the only order he had. He did not know. Neither did Weiss. Denise absorbed this and set it alongside everything else she had been absorbing in this canyon over the last 40 minutes. The locked command channel, the operation design, the word design. Someone had designed this. Someone had sat in a room with a map and a case file and had decided which people would be in which positions and which of those people would know what they were standing in the middle of and which ones would not. And Denise had been in the category of people who would not know. Until the count came out wrong. Did you know about my brother when you put my name on this convoy? She said. Yes, Dahl said. I read his full preliminary package. He described you in it. He said, if something happens before I can submit this, my sister Denise Holt will be running supply convoys through this corridor. She counts everything twice. She will find whatever you need her to find. Denise held the files and did not speak for a long moment. He had known. Garrett had sat down 3 years and 2 months ago and written her into his contingency plan. He had not known when or how the plan would activate. He had simply trusted that it would, and that she would be the one standing at the end of it, holding the count. She handed the files to Dahl, not because she was done with them, because the right next step was for them to be in a CID evidence chain rather than inside her body armor. Dahl took them with both hands. She looked at the cover page, at Garrett's penciled margin note, at the handwriting that was slightly too large for the space. Her expression did not change, but something moved behind her eyes that was not professional. Tell me what he found, Denise said. Dahl set her document case on the hood of the nearest operational truck and opened it. She removed a bound report, approximately 40 pages, with a CID classification header on the cover and a court declassification order stapled to the first page. Your brother identified the first anomaly 14 months before his death, Dahl said. A discrepancy between supply lot numbers on outgoing manifests and the lot numbers documented on receiving unit acknowledgments. The numbers did not match. The differential represented physical material that had been logged as delivered but had not arrived at the receiving units. She paused. He traced 3 separate instances over a 6-month period. He matched the missing lot numbers to a pattern of contractor invoicing filed by a logistics support company operating under a subcontract with a primary defense contractor. The primary contractor was the parent company of Warren Stull's consulting firm. How much material? Across the full documented period, which extends from approximately 4 years ago to the present, 42 separate lot diversions have been confirmed. Total value of diverted material in excess of $38 million. $38 million moved through the supply chain that Denise had been driving for 4 years, moved around her clipboards and her manifests, diverted in the layers above her clearance level, in the contractor invoicing systems that did not appear on the forms she verified each morning at the loading dock. Where did it go? She said. Dahl's expression acknowledged the weight of the question. Some of the material was resold through intermediary channels to civilian markets. A larger portion was directed through a series of front organizations to paramilitary procurement networks operating in the southwestern border region. The sound that a person makes when they understand something they have been living alongside, without knowing what it was, is not a sound at all. It is an absence. It is the moment when the background noise of 1,000 small facts suddenly assembles into a single complete fact that changes the meaning of all the smaller ones. The paramilitary forces that had put shooters on the ridgeline above this canyon today. The forces responsible for the increasing threat activity in the Sonoran corridor for the past 3 years, the activity that had made every convoy briefing include a threat assessment that everyone in the unit had gradually stopped hearing as new information, because it was always the same assessment. The forces that the United States Army had been sending supply convoys to counter. Those forces had been supplied in part by the convoys themselves. The ammunition that Denise had been hauling for 4 years, logged as delivered to forward units, signed off by a supply clerk on the contractor payroll. Some of those rounds had traveled a different route. Some of those rounds had ended up in the hands of the people who were shooting at her soldiers in this canyon today. She had driven the enemy's ammunition to the enemy without knowing she was doing it. She had done it correctly, on time, with proper documentation for 4 years. The convoy I drove into this canyon today, she said, was not part of the diversion network, Dahl said immediately. This convoy was clean. The cargo in crates 1 through 47 was legitimate. The diversion did not happen at the loading stage. It happened after delivery through falsified receiving documentation. You transported material to the location where it was subsequently diverted. The fault does not lie in your manifests. Denise looked at the cover page of the file in Dahl's hands. The fault does not lie in your manifests. She absorbed that and set it aside for later, for the hours when this canyon was behind her, and she had the time to sit with the distinction between what she was responsible for and what had been done around her. For now, there was only the document and the man in CID custody near the 4th truck, and the shape of something that had been true for 3 years and had not been named until today. The ballistic report, she said, the IED that killed my brother. Dahl reached into the document case again. She removed a single document, 9 pages, with a different classification header. Below the classification header was a court order date from 4 days ago. The document had been formally declassified for 4 days. She held it out to Denise. Denise took it. She read the summary page line by line, the way she read manifests, because skipping is how errors survive. The IED that killed Staff Sergeant Garrett Holt had been initiated by a specific type of detonating charge. The detonating charge recovered from the blast site in fragments had been analyzed and compared against Army lot documentation. The analysis had produced a match. The lot number from which the detonating material originated had been logged as destroyed in transit 7 months before Garrett's death. Destroyed in transit was the standard notation used when material was reported lost or damaged during convoy operations, and subsequently written off the active inventory without physical verification of destruction. The lot had not been destroyed. It had been diverted. Diverted through the same contractor network that Garrett had spent 6 months documenting. Diverted through the same invoicing chain operated by the company connected to Warren Stahl. Diverted and sold and resold, and eventually used to construct the device that killed the man who was in the process of proving the diversion had happened. The device that killed Garrett Holt had been built from material that Garrett Holt had been trying to prove was missing from the Army's inventory. He had been killed by the cargo he was trying to protect. Denise read the summary page twice. She did not look up while she was reading. The desert was very bright around her, and from inside the canyon she could hear the medics working and the QRF soldiers processing the scene, the organized sounds of people doing their jobs in the aftermath of something. She folded the ballistic report and placed it inside the stack of files. She held the stack with both hands. She thought about Garrett writing in the margin of the cover page in pencil, working something out as he went. She thought about the letter that had arrived at her mother's house 6 days after the funeral. "I found something in the crates, Denny. Something that should not be there." She thought about the word arrangement that Crane had used when he was standing at the rear of the 4th truck with his knife. She thought about a Thursday morning that had never arrived. She thought about 4 years of early mornings at loading docks in the Arizona heat, running her fingertips along the edges of crates, signing her name to manifests, making the count come out right because making the count come out right was what she was there to do. Garrett had counted twice also. He had just run out of time before he could submit the count. She walked to where Crane was standing near the 4th truck, in the custody of 2 QRF soldiers. His hands were secured behind him. His expression was the same expression it had been when she left him, the calibrated face, though the calibration was doing less work now than it had been doing for most of his 23 years of service. It looked like something that had been maintained for a very long time and had recently been relieved of the maintenance requirement. She stood in front of him. She did not speak for the length of time it took her to acknowledge that something was required here, before the federal process took over and reduced everything to case numbers and deposition transcripts. He looked at her face. He looked at the files in her hands. "He counted everything," Crane said. His voice was different now, not calibrated, smaller. The voice of a man who has set down a thing he had been holding for 3 years. Every lot number, every manifest discrepancy. He kept it in a personal log and he maintained the official documentation simultaneously and he verified each against the other. 6 months. I knew about the log for the last 2 months of his life. I was told to retrieve it. I told myself the retrieval was the end of it." He stopped. "I was wrong about that." She looked at him for the last time in the way you look at someone you have worked alongside before everything changed. "He was right to count," she said. She turned and walked away. Later, when the canyon was empty of everything except the wreckage of the lead vehicle and the tire tracks of the trucks that had survived and the scorched patch of road surface where the shaped charge had been recovered. She sat on the road shoulder outside the pass with her back against the canyon wall, and Settles sat beside her without speaking for a long time. Weiss had been loaded onto the medevac helicopter with a stabilized wound, and the beginning of an account he would be telling for years. Okafor had been treated and was moving through the QRF debrief process with the systematic competence of an officer who had been functioning in an uncontrolled situation and had returned to familiar ground. The desert was very quiet. The morning had advanced to the point where the sun was fully overhead, and the shadows had shortened to almost nothing, and the heat was the flat, total heat of Arizona midday that did not negotiate. "How long did you know about Crane?" Settles said. "The fence at 6:22, she said. "I did not know what I was looking at, but I knew something was wrong." "You wrote it down." "I write everything down." He was quiet again. "Then, your brother would have liked that answer." She did not respond for a moment. The hawk she had heard above the loading dock that morning was somewhere above the canyon now, circling in the thermal current that the heated rock faces produced. She could not see it, but she could hear it. "Yes," she said, "he would have." 3 weeks later, Sergeant Denise Holt stood at the front of a ceremony hall at Fort Huachuca and received a commendation for valor. The room was full, soldiers in dress uniforms, families in the chairs behind them, brass in the front rows, colonels and above, the people who managed the institution from its upper floors and who had arrived here today to acknowledge that something had happened in a canyon in the Sonoran Desert that required the institution to stand up and say so formally. Cameras, reporters with small digital recorders, a general with silver stars on his collar who shook her hand and met her eyes this time, which was more than she had expected. She had been asked to say a few words. She stood at the podium with her hands resting flat on its surface, and she looked at the room, and she found Settles in the third row, and she found Weiss, his left arm in a sling, sitting beside him. She found Okafor in the second row, his right shoulder bandaged under his dress jacket, watching her with the expression of a man who had spent 3 weeks assembling the parts of the story he had not been able to see in real time. She found her mother in the family section, a small woman from Prescott who had driven herself here and who had not cried when she embraced Denise, but had held on for a long time without speaking. She found the empty space where a specific person was not sitting. She looked at the room, and she took one breath and she spoke. "I want to tell you what my brother did," she said. "Because what I did in that canyon is a shorter story than most of you think, and the longer and more important story began 3 years ago with a man who was not in a combat role, and who did not carry a specialized weapon, and who was not assigned to any operation that anyone would have called dangerous." The room was quiet, in the way rooms go quiet when the person at the front is about to say something that cannot be taken back. Staff Sergeant Garrett Holt drove supply convoys through the Sonoran corridor for 14 months before he was killed. He drove the same roads I drove. He carried the same kinds of cargo I carried. He checked manifests and verified loads and signed his name at the bottom of forms that most people do not look at twice. She stopped. He looked at them twice, and then he looked again, and he found something that did not add up. And he spent 6 months making sure he was right before he told anyone, because he understood that a count that does not hold up is worse than no count at all. She looked at the general in the front row. "My brother did not die in an action that this institution will ever name a building after. He died because he counted correctly, and he refused to make the count come out wrong. He died because someone decided that his accuracy was a problem to be solved rather than a truth to be reckoned with. And the people who made that decision were not in a foreign country. They were inside the supply chain that he was maintaining. They were inside the system he trusted." The room was very still. "I'm not standing here because I am brave," she said. "I am standing here because I was trained to count and I counted. Everything else that happened in that canyon happened because the count was right and because I was not willing to give it to someone who wanted the count to be wrong." She paused for the last time. "My brother started the count. I finished it. The credit belongs to both of us and only half of it is mine." She stepped back from the podium. The applause that followed took a moment to begin, because the room needed a beat to decide how to respond to something that was not the speech anyone was expecting. Then it was full, and it was sustained, and somewhere in the third row Frank Settles was on his feet, and he was not looking at her with admiration. He was looking at her with something quieter and more specific, the expression of a man who had been in the same canyon and understood exactly what she had just described and knew that the description was accurate. That was enough. She visited Garrett's grave that evening. The cemetery was in Prescott, where their mother still lived, and the drive took 2 hours on a road that moved from the desert floor up into the Ponderosa country where the air was cooler, and the light came through the trees in columns rather than in the flat, pressing sheets it produced in the open desert. She drove the whole way with the windows down. The grave was in the veterans section, a white stone in a row of white stones, his name and his dates and his rank. She had been here 3 times before. Each time she had stood in front of the stone and found that whatever she had intended to say on the drive up had become inadequate by the time she arrived. This time she had not prepared anything to say. She stood in front of the stone as the light went low through the trees, and the evening insects started in the grass, and the whole cemetery took on the particular quality of late afternoon that cemeteries have, which is a quality of things being exactly what they are without any additional interpretation required. She took the copy of the case file cover page from her jacket pocket, not the original, which was in evidence, a copy she had made and had been carrying for 3 weeks. She folded it so that his name was visible on the outside. She set it against the base of the headstone and placed a small flat stone on top of it to hold it against the evening wind. She looked at his name on the stone. "The lot numbers matched," she said. "Everything you documented held up. The chain of custody on the evidence is clean, and the investigation is proceeding, and Stull has already provided names in exchange for a cooperation agreement that will not protect him from a long time in a federal facility." She paused. "Crane pled guilty last week. He will not see the outside of a federal prison for at least 12 years. The evening wind moved through the ponderosa trees. "Thursday arrived," she said. "It is 3 years late and it cost more than it should have cost, and I would give all of it back to have you here to hear it instead of me standing here saying it to a stone." She stopped. "But it arrived. The count was right. It held up. You were right to trust that it would." She stood there until the light was gone and the first stars were appearing in the sky above the trees, and the cemetery groundskeeper had turned on the low pathway lights that made the white stones glow faintly in the dark. Then she walked back to her truck. She sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and her hands resting on the steering wheel in the dark. She thought about the loading dock at Fort Huachuca in the orange light before the sun cleared the mountains. She thought about the feel of crate edges under her fingertips. She thought about the specific weight of a manifest when the count was right, which was not a physical weight but a weight of a different kind, the weight of accuracy, the weight of something being true because someone had taken the time to make sure it was true. Her phone rang. The name on the screen read Doll P. She looked at the name for 2 full rings. She answered. "There are 2 more convoy routes," Dahl said. "Different configurations, but similar cargo anomalies flagged in the pre-mission documentation. Stull's network has 3 remaining active subcontractors with current facility clearances. 2 are operating in the Sonoran corridor. One is running logistics out of Fort Bliss. A pause. I am not calling to ask you anything tonight, Sergeant. I am calling because you are the best person I know to read a manifest, and I want you to know that when the time comes, there is a place in this process for someone who counts correctly. Denise looked through the windshield at the cemetery path, lights glowing faintly in the dark. I drive in 3 days, she said. I know your schedule, Dahl said. Get some rest. The call ended. Denise sat in the truck for another moment. The ponderosa trees moved in the night wind above the cemetery fence, and the stars were fully out and somewhere in the trees. An owl was doing what owls do in the dark, which is to wait and watch and know exactly where everything is. She put the truck in reverse. She backed out of the parking space and turned onto the cemetery road and drove toward the gate. The headlights came on automatically, cutting a path through the dark. She had been just a driver. She had driven supply trucks down desert roads and counted crates at loading docks and signed her name to the bottom of forms that most people did not look at twice. And she had never once thought of herself as someone who would matter in the way that people who carry rifles are supposed to matter. She had counted 48 crates when the manifest said 47. Everything after that was arithmetic. She turned onto the highway and pointed the truck south, toward the desert, toward the corridor, toward the routes that still needed to be driven by someone who understood that the count had to be right, and that making the count come out right, even when someone above you wanted it to come out differently, was not a small job done by invisible people. It was the only job that mattered when everything else stopped working. She drove.